What's up, guys? In today's video we're going to be taking a deep dive into a really complex matchup that takes place this weekend between Punahele Soriano and Roman Kopylov. It's so complex that I've actually had to bring notes with me, which I very rarely do. You can see I've got notes written down here just so I don't miss out any of the important points. But this is a really complex fight, a fight that I definitely think could go either way. I certainly have a lean on this matchup, but it's one of those fights that's really difficult to feel confident on either way, because both guys are very flawed in different ways, and because they're both flawed, it's tough to trust either of them, because you know they've both got big weaknesses that the other could potentially exploit. So I spent a lot of time researching this matchup this week, and we're going to take a deep dive into it, and I hope that you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions this weekend and maybe even earn some extra cash. Also want to remind you guys that if you like these breakdown videos, you can find a ton more breakdown videos for every single fight on this card on my website, MMABettingTips.com. There's a link for that in the description below. I only upload breakdown videos for the main card fights to YouTube, so if you want all the breakdowns for the prelim matchups, head on over to my website to grab those. I've also got spaces available in my live betting group at the moment. If you're interested in joining, head on over to MMABettingTips.com, where you can sign up or just DM me, contact me for a free trial. Give it a try. It doesn't cost anything. I'm sure you're going to love it. But for now, let's break down the fight between Roman Kopylov and also Punahele Soriano. So if we start off by talking about the X factors on this matchup, because I do think the X factors are likely to have a pretty big impact on how this matchup plays out. We can see that Punahele Soriano is 30 years old, 5'11", with a 72.5-inch reach, while Roman Kopylov is 31 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 75-inch reach. So both guys roughly around the same age. We can see a bit of a reach advantage for Kopylov, but nothing too major. And to be honest, reach is going to have that much of an impact on this fight, because Kopylov's not a particularly good boxer anyway. He does have a long, lean frame, and you know he can chip away at his opponent from a reasonably far distance away with his long kicking game. But for the most part, Kopylov is primarily a kicks-based style of striker, doesn't really have much boxing, and as a result, I don't expect the slight reach advantage to have too much of an impact on how these two match up. So whenever we talk about Punahele Soriano, obviously the big talking point is how much of an impact his cardio is going to have on the outcome of the fight, because Soriano's one of these guys that gasses out really bad in pretty much all of his fights. The only fights where he doesn't gas out is in his fights that end too quickly for him to gas out, and we can see he's obviously been involved in a lot of matchups which have ended very quickly. You can see he's got tons of first round finishes here. But what you'll also notice is that aside from this matchup back in 2019 against Jamie Pickett, which he managed to win by decision, since then, any fight that has gone the distance, he's lost by decision. And that's because he's one of these guys that starts very strong. He's very dangerous early on, but the longer the fight goes, the less dangerous, the less effective he becomes as he gets more and more tired. And usually, by the 6, 7, 8 minute mark of a fight, he's usually very badly gassed, looks very sloppy. Now, when you look at a guy like Punahele Soriano, there's really no need for him to have a bad gas tank. I'm sure he trains very hard. I'm sure he eats very good. He certainly looks in very good shape. It's not like he's a giant heavyweight. It's not like he has to go through a brutal weight cut to make middleweight. He's only 5'11". So there's no real reason why his cardio should be as bad as it is. And over, the last few fights that he's had in the UFC, where we've been researching him and breaking him down, we've always said, he's young, he's got plenty of time to improve. Perhaps he will learn from whatever mistakes he's making with his strength and conditioning or his diet, fix them, and maybe this is the fight now where his cardio is just going to look amazing, right? And his cardio is going to look much better than usual. And if that happens, Soriano's going to be a problem, because he has got a very strong base in wrestling with decent striking, devastating knockout power to go with it. But this will be the this will be his 6th fight in the UFC. And up until now, there's been no signs that Soriano's gas tank is going to improve. He gassed bad against Brendan Allen. He gassed even worse against Nick Maximov. He also gassed in the fight he actually won by decision against Jamie Pickett, but Pickett's fight IQ was too bad for Pickett to capitalise on it. And he was also slowing down a lot towards the end of the first round of his last fight against Dalcha Lungambula before Lungambula popped a rib and basically got injured in the fight. And that's the main reason why I feel Lungambula won. Lungambula lost. He was doing well up until the point that his rib popped out. But point being, if Soriano didn't learn after the Allen fight, the Maximov fight, the Lungambula fight, what I'm trying to say is if he hasn't made any steps to improve his gas tank yet, is it ever going to happen? Because you'd think that Allen loss, the Maximov loss, would have been a wake-up call for him, and yet he still looked pretty bad against Dalcha and was slowing down at the end of round 1. So even though Soriano is young and at the stage in his career where you would expect him to be making big improvements from fight to fight, I don't think it's that likely that his cardio will improve, because I think it already would have if it was going to. So for that reason, this fight is likely to go like many other of Soriano's fights, where he starts very strong, looks very good, very dangerous early on, but in the midway point of the fight, midway through round 2, you're likely to see a bit of a momentum swing in Kopylov's favour. The question here is whether Soriano still has enough gas in the tank to do enough damage and score enough points in round 2 before he gets tired to put the fight out of reach for Kopylov. And what I mean by that is if Soriano is tired but still somewhat able to compete in round 2, because he is a decent amount better than Kopylov almost everywhere, Soriano has still got a pretty good chance of winning round 2. And then he only has to survive in round 3, which shouldn't be too difficult because Soriano's a tough guy and Kopylov's not really that dangerous. But if Soriano's absolutely gassed out of his mind after 6 or 7 minutes and Kopylov can backdoor win in the second round and then win the third more decisively by being the fresher fighter, that's where the fight gets dicey for Soriano. So the reason why I'm focusing a lot on Soriano in this breakdown is because I really feel the outcome of this matchup will be determined by how well Soriano's gas tank holds up. Now, Kopylov isn't completely off the hook either, because Kopylov is also a guy that has a tendency to slow down and become less effective as fights wear on. But the difference between Soriano and Kopylov is that Kopylov tends to slow down through fighting at a high pace. So when Kopylov slows, it's because he's doing stuff. He's throwing a high volume of strikes, he's working hard, he's burning through energy. Soriano just gasses because he just gasses. He has bad cardio. So what you tend to see from Soriano is very low output because he knows he can't afford to go hard, because the harder he goes, the sooner he's going to slow down and gas. So what you tend to see from Soriano is that he fights in bursts. So he'll blitz forward with big winging combinations where he looks to kill you and knock you out with one big shot, or he'll commit really hard to big explosive takedown attempts, and then if he gets the takedown, great, he'll try and beat you up a bit on the ground. If you survive the onslaught from his blitzing attacks with his strikes, he'll then kind of back off, reset, go to the middle of the octagon and look to take a 30-40 second break before his next blitzing attack, where he looks to kind of catch his breath, get his heart rate under control, and try to pace himself. The key to beating a guy like Soriano, the key to causing a guy like Soriano big problems, is to do exactly what Nick Maximov and exactly what Brendan Allen did to him, and don't allow him to take breaks. The kind of guys that Soriano is going to have a lot of success against are the guys that are going to show him a lot of respect. So if he comes forward, blitzes them, lands a lot of big shots on them, and they feel his power and they think, fuck, I don't want to exchange with this guy because if he hits me clean and hard, he's going to knock me out. These guys that kind of stand back and show Soriano a lot of respect and give him those 30-40 second breaks to catch his breath and pace himself, those are the kind of guys that are going to struggle against Soriano. The kind of guys that do well against him are the ones that constantly force him to engage. The ones that understand that even though in round 1 he's mean, he's tough, he's nasty, he's scary, he hits very hard, but they understand that if they keep forcing him to engage, the longer the fight goes, the less dangerous he becomes, the less effective he becomes. And you really see that in the Allen and Maximov fight. They both took different approaches to make Soriano work, but really they had the same outcome, where Allen was just constantly chipping away at Soriano on the feet, chipping away at him with body kicks, leg kicks, forcing him to engage, forcing him to exchange, forcing him to defend himself. And then we saw Maximov just spam takedowns, constantly force Soriano to grapple, constantly force Soriano to burn through energy. And what we saw in both those fights was Soriano actually have a lot of success on the feet against Allen, a lot of success on the ground against Maximov, until it got to the point where he was just too tired to fight effectively, and then we saw momentum swing in both Maximov and Allen's favour. And that's really the key to victory for Kopylov here. Just stay on Soriano's ass. Don't let him off the hook. The problem with this fight from a stylistic point of view is that Kopylov doesn't really have the skills to cause Soriano major problems. So the likelihood is that Soriano is going to be able to pace himself in this fight, because if you think about the ways in which you need to make Soriano work and engage, the two ways we've just spoke about, Maximov with his grappling, Allen with his striking, well, Kopylov can't really do either of those things. If we start off with grappling, I mean, that's Kopylov's biggest weakness. He's a pure kickboxer. I don't think I've ever seen him try to take anyone down. And whenever we've seen Kopylov on the ground, he's looked completely clueless. Now, his takedown offense isn't terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible. But the main reason why it's not terrible is because he's an athletic guy with really good balance. But he doesn't use particularly good technique to stuff takedowns. He's just difficult. It's just difficult to upset his balance, because his balance is very good and he's very athletic. But I do think if Soriano wants to get this fight to the ground, he'll have to commit a decent amount of energy, use a little bit of chain wrestling to upset Kopylov's balance and get him to the ground. But Kopylov's takedown offense is bad enough and Soriano's offensive wrestling is good enough for Soriano to have a decent edge on the ground here. He should be able to get Kopylov down, should be able to beat him up on the ground. Certainly in the first half of the fight when both guys are relatively fresh. What I would say about this matchup though is Kopylov is very game, very tough, and he has absolutely no quit in him. We saw that in his fight against Albert Duraev, where he had his nose absolutely crushed. He suffered tons of damage in that fight, and still there was no quitting him. He kept going. And so while I do think Soriano is going to be able to get this fight to the ground early, the second half of the fight will prove much more difficult. When both guys get tired, I think Kopylov's takedown defense will hold up a lot better than Soriano's offensive wrestling will, because I don't think Soriano's going to have the energy he's going to need to commit hard enough to his offensive wrestling to get the takedowns. Kopylov will be able to use far less energy to stuff the takedowns. So early on, Soriano can have a lot of success with his grappling. Late on, it's going to be a lot more difficult. So Kopylov using grappling as a way to wear Soriano out isn't something Kopylov can build into his game plan, because he's not going to be able to take Soriano down. If there is grappling in this fight, it's going to be Kopylov reacting to what Soriano is trying to do to him. Now, in terms of striking, we spoke about Brendan Allen's ability to just constantly force Soriano to engage, which wore him down. But it's also not going to be that easy for Kopylov to do that, because even though Kopylov does throw a high volume of strikes and he does work at a high pace, for the most part, Kopylov has a kicks-based style of striking. So he likes to chip away at his opponents with kicks from a safe distance. But he doesn't really have any boxing to back it up. Doesn't have much power in his hands. Just isn't very effective with punches. And so there's not that much danger there on the feet for Soriano. He can probably stay in his defensive shell behind his high boxing guard, go to his blitzing attacks every once in a while, and outside of that, he only really needs to worry about Kopylov chipping away at him with kicks, which aren't really that impactful and aren't going to do that much damage. So it is a good stylistic matchup for Soriano in the sense that he's got a big advantage when it comes to grappling over Kopylov. He lands the harder, more powerful, more impactful strikes. And while he won't be able to match Kopylov's volume on the feet, what he can do is certainly inflict more damage and land those big shots in the round that are going to get the attention of the judges. And of course, we've all seen how formidable, how tough, how dangerous Soriano is with how many first round knockout wins he's got on his record. I mean, Kopylov's a tough Russian who only takes one shot to land clean and hard to knock you out. So what does all that stuff mean from a betting point of view? Well, if we take a look at the odds on this fight, we can see the Soriano is a slight favourite at the moment at odds of around 1.63, which is minus 159 for an implied probability of 61%. Kopylov is the underdog at odds of 2.35, which is plus 135 for an implied probability of 43%. So in the eyes of the bookies, this is roughly 60-40 in favour of Soriano, and I would have to agree with them. This is not a fight that I can bet this weekend because, in my opinion, the odds are exactly where they should be. There's no value there on either side for me because the way I look at this is Soriano deserves to be the favourite because essentially he's better than Kopylov everywhere. There's no area I can look at in this fight and say, you know what, Kopylov's got an advantage there. Of course, his advantage is potentially being able to perform better over the full 3 rounds than Soriano can because Kopylov's gas tank is likely to hold up better. But that won't matter if Soriano wins round 1 dominantly and decisively, which you'd expect him to do, and then still has enough gas in the tank, enough power to put round 2 in the bank as well, maybe making it ugly, right? Stealing round 2 with a late takedown, something like that. That's certainly within Soriano's capabilities. So I agree Soriano should be the favourite, but Soriano's odds of 1.63 for an implied probability of 61%, they don't get me excited. You know, there's no bet there because you really don't want to be betting on a guy who's a moderate favourite that you know will be very badly gassed after 6 or 7 minutes, especially against a tough guy like Roman Kopylov that can really pour it on, really turn the fight into a war, and really make life tough for Soriano in the second half of the fight. So I do lean Soriano, but only a very slight lean. And so I probably agree that this fight is 60-40 and there's no value here. That doesn't mean to say we can't dig up some decent bets on prop bets, over-unders, that kind of thing. So let's take a look at those. So we can see that the main line on the over is set at 2.5 rounds. Over 2.5 rounds is 2.05, which is plus 105. That will be an implied probability of 49%. And the under is 1.74, which is going to be minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. Not sure if I'm going to be betting this, but if I were to go with the over or the under, I do think the over is a better bet. Purely because Roman Kopylov isn't that dangerous. Doesn't really have too much knockout power in his hands. Doesn't have any kind of submission game. And Soriano's shown us in the past that even when he gets very tired, he can still hang in there. He's only had 11 pro fights, but he's never been finished. So I don't think it's that likely Kopylov finishes Soriano. So then we've got to ask ourselves, how likely is it that Soriano finishes Kopylov? Well, he certainly has a lot of first round knockout wins on his record, but you can see many of these first round knockout wins come against a pretty low level of opponent. As soon as he makes that slight step up in the middleweight division, starts to face guys, you know, on that mid level, you know, guys like Brendan Allen, Nick Maximov, suddenly he's no longer death-shotting guys and knocking them out in a couple minutes. Instead, he's now starting to go the distance. And I feel the only reason why he was able to finish Dalcha was because Dalcha got injured in that fight. Dalcha actually looked great in round 1 and was causing Soriano a lot of problems in round 1. Dalcha was actually well on his way to winning that fight. So, can't really count that as a legitimate finish, in my opinion. So, with Kopylov not really being a finisher, and with Soriano also not really being a finisher after the 6 or 7 minute mark, with how tough Kopylov is, I don't see it as being that likely Soriano gets a finish either. For that reason, if you really want to bet the over-under on this matchup, I would take the over at, slight plus money. But of course, do your own research on this, because it's a complex fight. There's a lot to think about, and ultimately, Soriano is still a dangerous dude that hits very hard. Now, in terms of prop bets, whenever we're dealing with a guy that has a really bad gas tank, I'm always interested in betting on their opponent to win in the third round. Kopylov's not that dangerous. He's not really a finisher. But this is MMA, and when you can get odds of 13.0 plus 1,100, on a guy like Kopylov to beat an opponent with a bad gas tank in round 3 when they may be too tired to defend themselves, certainly don't hate that. The other obvious ones would be Soriano by knockout, with how dangerous he is, although the odds aren't great. 3.0 plus 200, that doesn't get me very excited. The other bet that I would potentially be interested in, maybe Kopylov by decision, but the odds on that aren't great either. 5.0 plus 400. It's tricky. It is tricky. What I would say is, if you are one of these guys that is thinking about betting Kopylov this weekend, I do think it's pretty damn unlikely Kopylov finishes Soriano. So with Kopylov not being a particularly strong bet to begin with, if you really want to bet this matchup, maybe take a sprinkle on Kopylov to win by decision instead. Because if Kopylov does win this fight, I do feel it will be by decision. So, you get better odds there, 5.0 plus 400. I don't like to get too cute with betting, but if you look at Kopylov's record, you can see that, since he's come into the UFC, just hasn't looked that dangerous. Although, De Chirico was tired in that third round too tired to defend himself against Kopylov. But Soriano is a tough nut to crack. Like I say, I'd be surprised if Kopylov got the finish. So anyway, hope you found that breakdown useful. If you want me to drop another breakdown like this, please hit the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my website, MMABettingTips.com, if you're already a member. Thank you very much, and take care, guys. I'll see you in the next video very soon. Nice one, guys. Bye.